A group of 6 vicious bikers entered a late-night café with the intention of robbing a stunning nurse who had just finished a hard shift at the hospital. They had no idea that Katherine Storm was no ordinary nurse. She served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic and received specialized training in tactical combat. The Steel Shadows MC would get a sobering lesson in choosing the wrong target, and their leader would be confronted with a revelation that would alter everything by the conclusion of the night. The tale unfolds as a group of infamous motorcyclists cross paths with an unlucky nurse, and the bravery of a single lady has a ripple effect that changes a whole town. Please inform us of your location before we resume. I have something really amazing in store for you tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe if this tale resonates with you. Long shadows were cast across the almost deserted parking lot by the fluorescent lights of Joe's all-night diner. While still dressed in her blue hospital scrubs, Katherine Storm sat at the counter, her dark hair cascading freely down her shoulders, exhausted from a 16-hour shift in the trauma unit. Her resilience and resolve saw her through 3 tours of duty as an Afghan combat doctor, despite her fragile appearance. Isabella Martinez sat onto the stool beside her best friend and colleague nurse, suggesting that they both go home and relax. It was quite a trauma surgery today. Katherine cradled a hot mug of chamomile tea in her hands, allowing its soothing heat to ease her aching muscles. Sure, I'll do that. Before I proceed, I need a moment to relax. At this hour, the diner was filled with the typical mix of long-haul truckers and night shift workers, but it was strangely quiet. The youthful server Vanessa, who had abandoned a career in modeling for a life of simplicity, sauntered deftly from table to table, restocking coffee cups and taking orders. It was that child today, Isabella went on to say in a low voice. We were all responsible if you hadn't stopped the internal bleeding at that moment. Katherine responded, even though they were both aware that the adolescent's life or death had been determined by her military medical training. The muted hum of motorbikes broke the tranquil ambience of the eatery. 6 motorcycles entered the parking area as the noise intensified and reverberated off the surrounding buildings. Shiny chrome lights illuminated by fluorescent bulbs. The mounted warriors dismounted with an air of well-rehearsed menace, their leather vests bearing the insignia of a howling viper. With the coffee pot quivering ever so slightly in her palm, Vanessa halted mid-step. Joe Martinez stepped out of the kitchen and watched the motorcyclists approach, his wrinkled face showing signs of worry. The commander was the first to enter, his icy gaze and salt and pepper beard giving him the air of someone accustomed to imposing respect and dread. Viper, president of the Steel Shadows MC, was inscribed on the patch on his vest. Following him was his enforcer, the towering figure known as Tank, and 4 other members whose violent reputations were well known. The scenario was examined through the mirror behind the counter, and Katherine did not move or even turn around, but her posture changed very subtly, as if her military training had kicked in. There are 8 civilians, including staff, and 6 hostels connected by 2 entrances. Assuring was the feeling of the tactical knife's weight in her boot, a habit she had never broken since leaving the service. The sound of Viper's voice reverberated throughout the eatery. Our search for a peaceful place to have a midnight snack seemed to have been successful. Out in the open, the motorcyclists staked their claims. As Tank went by, he accidentally knocked over a sofa. Quite a few customers were startled by the crash. Razor, another member, moved with his fingers running along the counter, causing silverware to fall to the floor. Are you gentlemen interested in anything I could get you? Vanessa inquired as her models tensely crouched beneath their menacing staircase. His eyes were unaffected by Viper's grin. Of course, my darling. Tell me why you're even here in this unassuming location, I'd love to know. While Isabella clenched her muscles next to Katherine, the latter put a soothing palm on Isabella's arm. No, not just yet. Just a moment. This is simply my work. Vanessa reacted by stepping back. You can place an order if you so like. Work that falls upon you. Snake, who was Viper's trusted associate, chuckled. You ought to be doing something far more exciting than selling coffee to truckers, honey, given your appearance. An old couple attempting to stealthily retrieve their belongings were seated in the corner booth. However, the gang's quiet member, Ghost, took action to obstruct their escape. He inquired about the departure date, his low voice carrying a darker undercurrent than Viper's cockiness. Just ignore them. The remarks, kind yet forceful, eased the strain. Nobody shifted their gaze from Katherine, who remained motionless at the counter. Without shifting her gaze, she sipped her tea once again. Viper drew nearer to her, his pupils constricting. My sweetheart, what was that? Katherine turned to meet his gaze, exuding an air of composed self-assurance. Viper was momentarily taken aback by her graceful figure and beautiful face. He evidently got over it, though, and soon he was staring intently at her scrubs. I told them to be quiet, Katherine said again. Just give them a break and let them savor their meal. Cracking his knuckles, Tank drew nearer. This tiny nurse seems to be quite courageous, boss. Viper leaned against the counter beside Katherine and grinned. Do you know the fate that befalls those who choose to remain oblivious in this town? Katherine's eyes remained closed as her lips curled into a subtle smile. Are you aware of the consequences for those who misinterpret generosity as a sign of weakness? A palpable sense of unease pervaded the diner. Katherine placed her hand on Isabella's arm, preventing her from standing. Joe went to get the phone from behind the counter, but was interrupted by Viper's piercing stare. Viper warned, his voice lowering to a menacing growl, that you're quite the orator. Someone should show you how to respect others. I learned a lot about respect during my 3 tours in Afghanistan, Katherine responded serenely. What I learned was that there is a world of difference between actual fighters and pretend bikers. Like smoke, the words lingered in the atmosphere. As Tank menacingly advanced, Viper, who was now closely observing Katherine, raised a hand in defiance. What about Afghanistan? Wolverine's grin took on a menacing tint. It seems like we've found a true hero, my friends. Razor let out a shrill, hideous chuckle. My darling, what were you up to over there? Distribute bandages? Just say no, Katherine, the combat medic, advised. Among other things, providing care for battle casualties. Viper understood the significance of those final 3 words. Re-evaluating the woman in front of him, he noticed, for the first time, her posture and the deliberate self-awareness in her eyes, which caused him to narrow his eyes. Nurse, you're completely out of your depth here, Viper whispered. The sandbox has been transformed. Katherine delicately placed her tea on the table. I see your point. A lot of people come here to dine quietly, to relax after a long day at the office and to catch up with friends over a meal. And you're currently upsetting that harmony. So, how will you address this matter? Tank insisted, drawing nearer still. At last, Katherine rose to her feet, her motions calm and graceful. She displayed zero signs of fear, even though her stature was dwarfed by Tank's enormous body. I'm offering you an option, she said, her voice resonating through the empty restaurant. You are free to depart at this moment and spend the evening somewhere, the rest of us can continue with our lives. Alternately, you can ramp up the difficulty and find out just what modern military doctors undergo in training. Gazing at Katherine's composed authority, the steel shadow's former self-assurance began to falter a little. Even Viper appeared uncertain at first, but he soon covered it up with a snarl. Listen up, dudes. I heard him shout. The young nurse has high hopes for her ability to face the steel shadows. The vibe of the restaurant, though, had changed. The other customers, who had been hunching over just a second ago, started to sit up straighter. Joe's expression hardened as he redirected his palm away from the phone. With the unfaltering support of Katherine, even Vanessa stood taller. With his voice reduced to a whisper, Viper drew near to Katherine. You're completely unprepared for this, my love. Katherine maintained eye contact with him. I don't either. As he watched Catherine's fixed stare, Viper's grin wavered for an instant. Like lightning just before a storm, the diner's tension crackled. As Tank drew nearer to his employer, his enormous form positioned itself to create a shadow over the counter. "Why do you believe that being a battlefield medic gives you an air of toughness?" There was an ominous quality to Viper's voice. "My darling, this is hardly a combat zone. This area belongs to us." Katherine stood motionless, her body comfortable yet vigilant. "What is the territory?" "Imagine this, a diner. For those who have worked long hours, this is the place to eat, chat, and relax. This is not a battle zone, it's just you and your team." Snake advanced, the creak of his leather vest audible. "Allow me to demonstrate to this nurse what occurs when individuals fail to understand their role, boss." Viper stood his ground, signaling with a raised hand, all the while maintaining eye contact with Katherine. "A respectful lesson is in order for our young hero here." Isabella rose carefully to her feet, her voice unwavering even though her heart was pounding. In a composed manner, Katherine said, "Maybe we should." To Bella. "You should lend Vanessa a hand in rescuing the old couple. This is ridiculous, and the Jenkins couple shouldn't have to handle it at their anniversary meal." Rather than being intimidated by any threat, the motorcyclists were more startled by Katherine's calm and collected handling of the issue. From close to the entrance, the normally silent ghost shouted up. "There seems to be an issue with this one, boss. The confidence she exudes." With a pointed motion, Viper interrupted him. "I could care less if she's the Marvel superhero. In our town, no one speaks to us in this manner." "The town where you live?" There was an air of slight amusement in Katherine's voice. "In this community, I have spent the past 4 years rescuing people. Operating 16-hour shifts in the trauma unit, caring for both young and old patients. So far, all you've accomplished is make people afraid to live their lives." A scalding cup of coffee splattered all over the counter after being knocked over by a razor. Just because she had a role as a nurse in the desert doesn't give her the right to act superior. Katherine softly interjected, presenting 3 hearts of a purple hue. 2 stars in bronze. "My role was not that of a nurse. Bullets ripped through our medical tent as I kept soldiers alive in the midst of intense fire. Blast injuries occurred as mortars dropped all around us, and I've treated them. In the past, I've been in a surgical emergency and used only a pen light and a pocket knife." As her remarks hit home, the diners went quiet. It seems like even Viper could tell that this was more than just some late-night intimidation. "Having medals makes you invincible, right?" A hint of doubt lingered in his voice as he rumbled. "No," Katherine said. "Thanks to my background, I can think clearly. With training, I am able to do more. My compassion compels me to provide you one final opportunity to exit before things escalate." Tank grinned savagely. "I dislike it. There are 6 of us and you, my dear." Katherine said that, in the absence of context, numerical values are meaningless. Like the adolescent who visited my emergency room earlier. He was considered a hopeless case by everyone. Extreme internal hemorrhage, trauma from a collision, yet the ability to apply pressure precisely, familiarity with the human anatomy, and composure under duress. The distinction between life and death is that. The bikers picked up on the subtle warning in her remarks. Viper's expression turned gloomy as he recognized that her description extended beyond mere medical operations. "Is the nurse threatening us?" While gesturing toward the knife he wore on his belt, he inquired. "Not aggressive, just a heads up. 2 types of veterans have served in battle. Those who aren't afraid to boast about their accomplishments and those who prefer to remain silent as they have nothing to prove. Tell me which one it is." With Isabella and Vanessa's assistance, the old couple made their way to the kitchen, evading the growing tension. Joe remained positioned behind the bar, his hand currently resting on the baseball bat he stashed for use in times of crisis. Out of nowhere, Snake snatched a few sugar packets and flung them at Catherine's face. However, she had already begun to move, her reflexes sharpened by extensive combat training. She gracefully avoided the attention without changing her demeanor. "That was foolish," she whispered. "A responsible party will now have to clear up the mess you've created." The patience of Viper was eventually tested. "Quit babbling. Tank, this is the real deal when it comes to intimidating our hero." With a wide grin on his face, Tank advanced, his large hands tightly clenched. Katherine spoke up once more, this time with an authoritative tone that rendered him speechless. "Stop doing something you'll later come to regret. You should be aware that I was the one who intervened to prevent the death of Officer Thompson's daughter, the one who suffered from a severe asthma attack last month. In the time after, Mike became a trusted buddy. Around this time every night, he checks on this diner." Actually, she took a quick look at her watch and realized that he ought to be entering the parking lot at this very moment. A sequence of flashing red and blue lights appeared to be coming from the windows. A police siren's distant wailing became louder, and Viper's expression twisted with fury. He unleashed a vicious sneer. Katherine voiced her disapproval. "Nope. I'm more familiar with this town than you would believe. As a healer, protector, and caretaker, I am familiar with the people. You essentially hunt them down and devour them." The motorcyclists were agitated by the outside sound of slamming automobile doors. Ghost, whose self-assurance had just faded, backed away from the entrance. "Boss, I think we should go," he whispered. "We can do without this heat." However, Viper's pride was wounded in front of his men, and he was now too invested. As he approached Katherine, he whispered something ominous. "There is still a long way to go, nurse." Katherine maintained eye contact with him. "I see your point. I will be back in my emergency room tomorrow, treating people and saving lives, so it's not done yet. Even after all this time, you will still riding around town attempting to persuade yourself that respect is equivalent to terror." With his hand casually resting on his holstered firearm, Officer Mike Thompson strolled in as the diner door opened. When he caught sight of Katherine, his gaze swiftly scanned the area, blending professional evaluation with personal worry. "Good evening, everyone," he remarked, his easygoing demeanor betraying the intensity of his stare. "Is everything all right here?" Viper was conflicted, torn between his need for vengeance and the gravity of his predicament. With a final gesture to his staff, he took a step back. He continued, "We were just leaving," without ever taking his gaze off Katherine. "Do you agree, guys?" Instead of brazenly advancing, the other motorcyclists nodded and cautiously withdrew. As they proceeded past Officer Thompson, Viper made a final U-turn. He attempted to seem menacing as he wished the nurse a good night. "It would be wise to be cautious." Katherine responded in a measured and composed manner. "As always, I do. Also, keep in mind that I swore to aid everyone, even those who don't deserve it, so the next time you or your crew need medical assistance, you can count on me. We differ in that respect." Before turning to Katherine, Officer Thompson waited for the roar of the motorcycles to subside. "Are you okay?" With a blend of serious concern and objective evaluation, he inquired. "No worries, Mike." As Katherine spoke, she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. All they wanted to do was scare people. "I am familiar with all of this." Bit by bit, the eatery re-energized. Vanessa came out of the kitchen carrying the old couple as Isabella embraced Katherine firmly. As soon as the motorcyclists had gone, Joe set out to clean up their mess. He moves with an angst that refuses to go away. As Mike settled into a seat at the counter, he remarked that those were no ordinary troublemakers. The county has been experiencing troubles because to the Steel Shadows. We've spent months attempting to gather evidence against them. Despite the adrenaline still flowing through her veins, Katherine steadied her hands as she poured fresh tea into her cup. "Mike, they are bullies. And they are clueless when it comes to dealing with bullies who stand up to them. To be sure, you gambled a lot, Isabella cut in. The Viper isn't the type to let things go easily. Imagine they return. So long as it's taken care of, Katherine stated plainly. I didn't make it through 3 tours to stand by and watch as narcissists terrorize defenseless civilians. As this was happening, the Steel Shadows were reorganizing in a deserted warehouse outside of town. As he paced restlessly, Viper's boots reverberated on the hard floor. Nervously, the rest of the group watched as their leader's wrath intensified. Spit out by Viper, a nurse. We looked feeble because of that awful nurse. This cannot be tolerated. Tank supported his bruised pride by leaning on his bike. She is more than just a nurse supervisor. She has a military record that you heard. Weapons medic with a plethora of embellishments. Rambo in scrubs is fine with me. Viper passed out. No one pays the Steel Shadows any mind. Snake cautiously but eagerly stepped forward. So, boss, what's the game plan? So, what's the plan? Viper halted his pacing as a menacing grin grew on his face. We must communicate. Everyone in town, not only her. Give them a taste of what happens when we cross the line. At the diner, Mike had previously been collecting statements from other patrons. Even though they were thankful, the elderly Jenkins couple remained shaken. As she gently patted Katherine's hand, Mrs. Jenkins remarked, "That young lady reminds me of my daughter in the Marines. Similar subdued power." Jenkins, Mr. nodded. Never encountered something comparable. Refrained from making threats or raising her voice. Presumably unaware of the gravity of the situation, she merely stood there. According to Mike, who was finishing up his notes, that's because she did. Those bikers can't compare to Katherine's battle experience. They were blissfully unaware of it. Joe came over bearing freshly brewed coffee for everybody. It's been my ownership of this land for 20 years, he replied, his head cocked. Never faced a challenge I couldn't overcome. Tonight, though, was unique. If Katherine, you hadn't shown up. However, I was present, she interjected with ease. No worries, I will be back. Joe, I also call this place home. No one can intimidate me into giving it up. Vanessa, who appeared somewhat pale but had regained her calm, took a seat beside Isabella. The expression on their faces, as if we were animals in need of protection. Katherine, you appeared completely unfazed. With an eye on her combat training, Katherine recalled that one might choose to feel afraid. People die in the field because they are afraid. You find a way to direct it, to channel it so that it propels you forward rather than holds you back. Mike got up to respond when he heard a crackling on the radio. He seemed downcast upon his return. The station was there. Multiple incidences in 3 different counties have all pointed to the Steel Shadows. Harassment, violence, coercion. Nothing has ever stuck because we have never had adequate proof. So far, Isabella expressed optimism. In agreement, Mike gave a nod. Very possibly. You must use caution, Katherine. These people, they have no sense of propriety. Viper, however, is known to harbor resentment. I know the type, Katherine responded, recalling her experiences in Afghanistan. Because they are accustomed to having people back down, men enjoy that. When confronted, they have their entire worldview shattered. The night has been much calmer outside. Only the employees and a few devoted regulars remained after most of the regulars had departed. Prior to his return, Mike completed an additional search of the parking lot. He promised to have patrols keep watch on the area. Still, Katherine, it could be a good idea for you to relax for a bit. Take a breath and relax. There was a firm dismissal as she waved her hand. Mike, it is not going to happen. At the hospital, I work shifts. Nobody can find me if they have a patient who needs me. The friend's hand was gripped by Isabella. Give me the opportunity to take you home this evening. Joining forces, isn't it? A ring came from the diner's phone before Katherine could answer. Joe took the call, his expression turning gloomy as he listened. He waited a second before giving Katherine the phone. "It's for you," he whispered. With her premonition, Katherine accepted the receiver. The phony politeness seeping from Viper's words was audible. "He merely wanted to ensure that you returned home safely, nurse. The world is full of peril. An individual's fate is completely unpredictable if they are oblivious to their position in the food web." There was no change in Katherine's voice. "Is that only the reason you contacted Viper? Just so I can see that you can locate a phone number? This is not impressive." After a moment of silence, Viper's voice grew more forceful. "On display for all to see, you publicly shamed us. Unfortunately, that isn't good for humans." Katherine responded, "Let me be very clear," adopting the same combat-ready tone of voice she had previously used. "You will discover the true power of combat medics the next time you or your squad approach this diner and attempt to intimidate or threaten the folks who work there. We are completely familiar with the human body, its ins and outs, and all the potential points of failure. This allows us to do much more than simply repair people. Consider it." Prior to his response, she abruptly ended the call and glanced up to see that everyone was staring at her. Mike was very impressed and shook his head. "Do you truly never give an inch?" The words, "can't," were spoken by Katherine in a straightforward manner. "When you begin to capitulate, they seize the opportunity. No way am I going to sit back and let bullies prevail when I made it out of a war zone alive." Even though Katherine was getting ready to go, she couldn't escape the notion that this was only the start. Viper would not relinquish this. That was never his style. It was not a matter of whether he would exact revenge, but rather when and how. And when he was ready, she would be prepared. Despite what had happened the night before, Katherine was just as attentive when she reported for her shift at Mercy General Hospital the following morning. With a worried expression on his face, Dr. James Wilson hurried up to her as the emergency room was already crowded. As they fell into step side by side, he related what had transpired at Joe's. Here, rumors spread like wildfire. "Are you okay?" Katherine said, "I'm fine," while walking with her hair tied back. Going to the diner for yet another night. According to Dr. Wilson, the Steel Shadows are more than simply a rogue gang. It was convenient that none of the victims would seek charges, so they put 3 guys in RR last month. The evacuation doors swung open before Katherine could react. A young man, his face covered in blood and bruises, was brought in on a stretcher by paramedics. Being already on duty, Isabella wasted no time in getting to help. "What is our inventory?" Katherine inquired, immediately assuming an air of serious professionalism. The paramedic stated that a man in his mid-20s was discovered battered behind Charlie's pub. Potential internal damage, many contusions. Before he passed out, he made a comment about shadows. They started treating the patient, and Katherine and Isabella sent each other knowing glances. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The Steel Shadows warehouse, located across town, was where Viper was presiding over his inner circle. Several images of Katherine going into and out of the hospital were among the maps and photographs dispersed on the improvised table. Snake said that most of the time she works the night shift. Her usual stop when her shift ends is Joe's. Those apartments off Mason Street are his lonely home. Viper, his mouth clenched, inspected the images. "How frequently does the police officer, Thompson, visit the eatery?" Ghost confirmed that they had regular patrols every couple of hours. "Other officers have been keeping tabs on him since last night." Tank hissed that they were attempting to encircle us. "Bring out our frailty." The table was pounded by Viper's fist. "Nobody in this town will forget why the Steel Shadows are so terrifying when we finish. We aren't weak." The patient had been stabilized when Katherine and Isabella returned to the hospital. The narrative was clearly conveyed by the young man's wounds. Violence with a message in mind. Throat fractures. While they were updating the charts, Isabella whispered something. Arms wounded in self-defense. Their goal was to make him suffer. They want his whereabouts. Sophia made the necessary corrections. This is Viper's reaction to last night, demonstrating the consequences for those who defy authority. They were accompanied by Dr. Wilson. I am looking at the patient's scans. The police are en route to interview him, but I highly doubt he will cooperate. One of the strongest motivators is fear. It takes bravery, as Katherine remarked, and the determination of a single individual to make a difference. Tension lingered under the surface as the day's typical medical emergency and regular situations unfolded. The altercation at Joe's had gone viral, and Katherine could sense that people were staring at her as she made her way through the halls of the hospital. While she was on break, she discovered Isabella in the break room, her hands shaking as she clutched a coffee cup. The words, spray-painted shadows, were spoken by Isabella without any qualifying words. Splash of blood-red paint. Last night, for some reason, the security cameras stopped functioning. Katherine joined her pal in taking a seat. I apologize, Bella. Because of me, Isabella's voice grew louder. This is all down to them. Just because they believe that being afraid gives them authority. However, last night you demonstrated something different to everyone. Their pagers went off at the same time, cutting them off. Yet another crisis was on the horizon. They discovered 2 additional casualties with injuries identical to their morning patient as they hurried to the emergency room. Mike Thompson, who arrived to take statements, stressed that this is just the beginning. Shadows are expanding their territory and proving they can harm those associated with the hospital, including you. Quick on her feet, Katherine treated her new victims while her thoughts raced. Viper was getting more agitated than she had anticipated because of how quickly things were heating up. Guys like him couldn't take having their authority challenged. We have to put a stop to this, Mike maintained. But without witnesses eager to testify. After that, we'll make them feel comfortable enough to testify, Katherine stated as she finished a stitch. Let them see that they are not alone in their fears. Katherine observed a heightened police presence surrounding the hospital as her shift came to a close. She was aware that the plainclothes officers that Mike had designated to guard the exits were insufficient. No one would be able to stop the steel shadows until they received a response to their message. She took off her scrubs in the locker area and checked her phone, which had multiple missed calls from Joe. All day long, the eatery had a string of menacing visitors. The Steel Shadows members simply came in, got coffee, and left without paying. Nothing flashy. Pushing limits. Do you still intend to visit the diner this evening? As Katherine gathered her belongings, Isabella watched and inquired. As a matter of fact, I am, Katherine said. Viper anticipates that very thing. He wants us to modify our habits out of fear and seclusion. He will win the point when we do it. I beg you, Isabella, at least let me accompany you. Numbers provide security. She grinned at her friend's unwavering devotion. Yes, please return home and stay safe. Make sure you're not in harm's way, I need that assurance. Feeling eyes peering at her from behind, Katherine hurried out of the hospital. Certainly under Viper's watchful eye. Permit them to observe, she reasoned. Make it clear to them that their attempts at intimidation would be futile. As she made her way to her car, her senses were on high alert, relishing in the crisp night air. She had honed her ability to listen to her gut and recognize danger signals throughout her time in Afghanistan. At this very moment, her gut was telling her that Viper had some grand plans. Is she going to be prepared for it when it arrives? There was an odd lack of noise in Joe's diner when Katherine showed up. There were just a few of regulars at the booths, and Vanessa's normally cheerful smile seemed forced as she brought out coffee. Upon Katherine's arrival, the youthful waitress hastened to her side. According to Vanessa, who cautiously glanced at the door, they've been coming and going all day. A new group of people, every few hours. being apathetic and uninvolved, causing discomfort to those around me. Sitting down at the counter as usual, Katherine noticed the new scratches on its surface. Knife marks that were intentionally made. A wave of relief swept across Joe's weary face as he came from the kitchen. "Thank God you're here," he whispered. "Viper in particular has been inquiring about you." About noon, he walked in and sat down where you were, observing everyone intently. He is attempting to assert his dominance. With a cup of tea in hand, Katherine responded. "Let everyone see that he is in charge of the room." As the darkness fell, the sound of a motorcycle's engine pierced the air. As the volume increased, 3 motorcycles entered the parking lot. As Katherine peered out the windows, she saw that Razor, Snake, and Ghost had gotten off their motorcycles. Would Mike be the one to answer the phone? As Joe reached for the phone, he inquired. "Not yet," Katherine added in a low voice. "Let's find out what they're after." Metal chains jingled from the belts of the motorcyclists as they strode in with an air of calculated bravado. As soon as Snake laid eyes on Katherine, a scowl formed on his lips. "Hey, see out who it is," he drew lead. "Our beloved nurse, exactly where Viper had indicated she would be." Katherine persisted in her tea drinking without looking back. "Snake, your employer tasked you with performing his dirty work. His behavior lacks leadership qualities. As a result, Ghost and Razor effectively boxed in the few remaining customers by moving to opposite sides of the diner." Snake drew near the counter, his proximity to Katherine being an issue. According to Snake, whose voice had lowered to a frightening whisper, "Boss simply wanted us to convey a message." "Okay, so tell me about last night." "I was only doing warm-ups. Here we will demonstrate the consequences of someone truly angering us. When you threaten individuals who aren't guilty." At last, Katherine shifted her gaze to meet his. "No, Snake, that is not strength. It's heartless." A shadow fell across Snake's face. In an abrupt motion, he took Katherine's arm. Her movements were so swift that she thwarted his attempts to tighten his fingers. She swiftly pressed her palm on the counter, squeezing him so hard he gasped in agony. "What a fascinating tidbit about battlefield medics," she said softly while keeping the grip. "Every single cluster of nerves, pressure point, every mechanism via which the human body feels pain, and how to alleviate it, is precisely known to us." Razor and Ghost were about to advance when Katherine's voice halted them. "Proceed with caution when deciding what to do next. In this situation, your friend just has 3 seconds to escape the unpleasant messages sent by these nerve endings to his brain." Sweat was dripping down Snake's forehead, and his complexion had turned white. Detach. When will you learn to behave?" Asking in a soothing tone, Katherine seemed to be addressing a disruptive patient. Snake nervously nodded. He staggered backward, gripping his hand, as Katherine let go of him. As they observed, the other motorcyclists felt a mix of shock and fatigue. Katherine now rose to her feet with deliberate gait. "You can advise Viper to personally deliver messages if he so desires. By engaging in these bullying tactics, you are merely confirming what everyone already knows." "Oh no, he's really slipping. As you advance, you're already dead," your jaw clenched. "Can you hear what I'm saying? Dead." No, everyone in the restaurant could hear Katherine. "I am alive. My 3 stints in a combat zone were successful. You wouldn't believe the wounds I've healed. I have operated on patients as mortars went off all around me. Do you really believe that I would be frightened by your demands?" Razor, unknowingly backing away, she approached. "Want to know what it's like to be truly afraid? As bullets whiz by overhead, you hold the life of a soldier in your hands. The difference between life and death is in the split-second judgments that one must make. It's quite demanding. Is that it?" Around the diner she made motions. Despondent males attempting to project an image of strength. Each motorcyclist gave the other a wary look. Nothing was going as planned. Snake continued to flex his hand in an effort to alleviate the persistent discomfort. Ghost cautioned that Viper would not let this slide. Delivering my inaugural speech. "I'm counting on it," Katherine responded. Reason being, he will come to terms with the fact that fear is effective only when individuals give in to it. Additionally, I no longer experience fear. At that very moment, lights outside flashed red and blue. The patrol vehicle belonging to Mike Thompson was one of 3 that rolled into the parking lot. Coolly, Katherine explained that would be her backup plan. "It would be wise for you to depart before Officer Thompson plans to check your license plates. From what I've heard, there are a number of outstanding warrants." With their former bluster replaced by barely veiled rage, the motorcyclists withdrew. As they got on their bikes, Snake whirled around for one final attack. "Viper will find out about this. As well as when he does." Katherine stepped in when he did. "Let him know that I already mentioned that he should deliver messages personally. Just like last night, I'll be here tonight. He is well aware of my whereabouts if he wishes to resolve this matter." The Steel Shadows mounted their motorcycles and bolted into the night. The remaining patrons inside started applauding at the same time. While Vanessa wiped away tears of relief, Joe heaved a big breath. Entering the diner, Mike casually rested his hand on his holstered handgun. "Are we all right?" With that, Katherine went back to her tea. "Will tomorrow night be an exception, though? Viper will make an appearance personally tomorrow night. Then we'll find out the Steel Shadow's true colors." A text message from Isabella rang on her phone while she talked. 2 other individuals were now brought to the emergency room. "The Viper count is rising. Use caution." To calm herself, Katherine shut her eyes for a moment. The tides were turning, and tomorrow would mark the start of either an end to Viper's terror or something far worse. While Snake, Ghost, and Razor reported back to Viper, the Steel Viper's warehouse descended into anarchy. The gang boss listened to their version of events at the diner with a furious expression on his face. "You were both embarrassed by her," Wolverine hissed as he paced the hard floor. "A nurse. The nurse made my best guys look foolish." "That nurse is great, boss." Snake continued to show his hand in defiance. The way she walked, her knowledge of nerves and pressure points. "We've never seen anything like her training." As he stepped out of the shadows, Tank's enormous stature obstructed the faint illumination. "We proceeded to strike her where her training was irrelevant. Powerful and overwhelming." Viper halted his pacing as a menacing grin grew on his face. "She wants me to go to her, right? Okay, but I want to do things in my own way. Have everyone come in. When someone dares to challenge the Steel Shadows, tomorrow night we will show this community the consequences." Katherine worked her shift at Mercy General, across town, with a heightened awareness. Viper may have had a message for each new patient. Every harm could be a signal. Throughout the night, Isabella remained at her friend's side, her concern evident in her watchful eye. While attending to a patient, Isabella mentioned the text message she had sent. "Those 2 casualties." The order was deliberate. They were Joe's regulars, the 2 of them. Grimacing, Katherine gave a nod. "In an effort to cut me off from society, Viper is going after individuals he associates with me in the hopes that they would make others terrified to be in my presence. Does it function as intended?" Looking around the almost deserted waiting area, Isabella inquired. The word got around fast. For fear of being a target themselves, people were avoiding the emergency room. "No," Katherine firmly responded. "All it does is reveal Viper's true character. A cruel person who takes advantage of those who are vulnerable." While they were on break, Dr. Wilson summoned them to his office. The chief of emergency medicine, who typically remains composed, appeared distressed. Without elaboration, he stated that the hospital board is worried. "Because of these assaults and threats, we are unable to provide adequate patient care. No one dares step foot inside. May I ask what you mean? Please, Isabella said. Be careful, Wilson said, fixing his gaze squarely on Katherine. You have our support, but this is getting out of hand. Viper is now going after more than just you. Everyone in the town is in his sights. Katherine sprang to her feet, her voice unwavering. For that very reason, this must come to a close. No matter what happens tomorrow night, it will. At the end of her shift, Katherine discovered Mike Thompson standing outside her car. There was a hint of gloom in the cop's face. He mentioned that we had reports. Viper has ordered more help to be sent in. Cyclists from different groups. Past due balances being recouped. His plans, whatever they may be, are massive. Good, Katherine responded, taking him by surprise. His army can come with him. It will have no effect. Never try to take on those challenges by yourself. I refuse, Mike said. According to Katherine, I won't be by myself. In Afghanistan, I picked up some knowledge. Being the strongest person doesn't mean you have to use the most force. Having the correct people by your side is crucial. She was already thinking about what she would do tomorrow night as she drove home. After she left the service, she opened a locked chest in her apartment. Within were her unit's pictures, her combat medals, and possibly other mementos. From her time as a battlefield medic, she inherited a little black box full of specialist gear. A message from Joe rang her phone. Throughout the day, they observe the eatery and capture images of patrons. There is a lot of fear. After that came another message, this time from Vanessa. Someone mentioned that tomorrow night's performance will be the talk of the town when they arrive today. Like she always did before risky missions, Katherine set out to prepare meticulously. Viper would try to outnumber her in the belief that sheer numbers would prevail, which she was well aware of. In the field, though, where split-second judgments were life or death, she had encountered harsher odds. Viper amassed his increasing power at the warehouse. As more and more chapter members showed up, the parking area was packed with dozens of bikes. Snake felt uneasy as he observed the preparations. "Boss," he said with great care. "Perhaps we're going a bit overboard. There's only one lady." Viper charged at him, his glare intense. "That one woman who brought out our frailty. A single lady who believes she can confront us head-on. Nobody in this town will have the guts to face the steel shadows again after tomorrow night." Katherine watched the street below from her window as night fell. They were visible to her. At regular intervals, motorcyclists observe her structure. Keeping an eye on her, Viper made sure she was aware someone was watching. Someone called her. "Hello, Isabella." Her companion casually mentioned that the emergency room is getting ready for tomorrow night. As a precaution, Dr. Wilson has summoned more help. "Do you have any doubts, Katherine?" According to Katherine, she is more certain now than she has been about anything since she left the military. Viper believes that by instilling fear in people, he can shatter them. He will discover the true meaning of bravery tomorrow night. She hung up and got back to her prepping. Not only would tomorrow alter her and Viper's lives, but everyone's. For the whole town, though. It was irrelevant as to whether or not she was prepared. However, it is debatable if Viper realized the gravity of his situation. Katherine had no intention of allowing bullies to prevail at home after enduring 3 trips. Combat medics were highly esteemed and feared on any battlefield, and the Steel Shadows would discover this very thing tomorrow night. A strange stillness descended over the evening of the following day. The approaching twilight revealed Joe's diner as a fortress-like structure. Across the almost deserted parking lot, its neon lights threw multicolored shadows. Joe and Vanessa were inside getting ready for a night they would never forget. "You are under no need to remain," Katherine informed them as she punctually entered. While she did indeed wear her hospital scrubs, her demeanor was noticeably different on this occasion. There was a laser-like focus, as if she had just returned from the military. A resolute, "This is my place," came from Joe. His arthritic hands firmly grasping the counter. "I refuse to let them force me to go." While pouring coffee, Vanessa's hands quavered a little, but she still nodded. "You can count on our unwavering support, Katherine." As we stepped outside, the roar of motorbikes became more audible. This time, it was dozens of bikes, not a handful. They sound like approaching thunder as they roar together. As usual, Katherine sat at the counter and calmly sipped her tea, enjoying the scene as the parking lot was illuminated by headlights. Her phone picked up Mike Thompson's crackly voice. 30 bikes, give or take. Everyone he knows was summoned by shadows. "I want you to remain back until I give the signal," Katherine cut in. "My officers are on standby. Whatever happens, this concludes tonight." The riders dismounted their bikes in a staged demonstration of aggression as they encircled the eatery. Viper took the lead, his leather vest splattered with patches representing other chapters' alliances. Ghost and Razor trailed closely after, while Tank and Snake formed a right angle to him. Inquiring about the large number of soldiers they had brought, Katherine exclaimed as they got in. "Just for a single nurse? I am deeply moved." As he looked around the practically deserted restaurant, Viper's grin was icy. "Listen up, champion. Who has been your ally in this? This priceless group of people. Standing up to the steel shadows is not something they should do." "Or perhaps," Katherine responded consistently. "They are at the ideal position." Across the street, headlights turned on as if at the last possible moment. Vehicles lurking in the shadows suddenly sprung to life. People in their cars, including delivery drivers, healthcare workers, and regulars at the eatery. They were demonstrating their lack of fear, despite Viper's attempts to scare them. Viper's countenance grew gloomy. "Think we'd be scared of a few cars carrying innocent people?" "Yes," Katherine rose slowly. "I sense a sense of fear in you already. That is why it was necessary for you to bring an army. Since you are aware, on a subconscious level, that you need help with this." With a crack of his knuckles, Tank advanced. "Quit babbling. How about we demonstrate to this nurse what occurs when?" "When exactly?" Katherine walked in. "In a situation where confronting a single woman requires the courage of 30 men? Is that the impression you wish to convey?" Her remarks were deeply hurtful. Uncomfortably, a few of the bikers from different chapters shifted. Their esteem for Viper was clearly dwindling. "You have finished speaking." "Snarl," the Viper growled. A knife was retrieved by him. "Blade is capturing the lights of the diner. Get a feel for where you fit in." Katherine's countenance remained unchanged. "Just one more shot, Viper. Exit the room. You can depart from this town peacefully with your army." Viper made a rush forward as Blade sliced through the air, refusing to answer. Nonetheless, Katherine had begun to move. Years of combat training had sharpened her reactions. With surgical accuracy, she redirected his arm, hitting a clump of nerves that caused his fingers to twitch. With a clatter, the knife fell to the ground. "Oh my!" Viper lurched backwards, his hand trembling with numbness. Katherine quietly described pressure point manipulation. Among the initial lessons taught to military medics. Curious about what more we find out? Katherine deftly sidestepped Tank as he charged forward. Her elbow landed between his ribs, causing him to collapse to the floor in a gasp. She went on, her voice unwavering, about anatomical weak spots. All of the human body's weak points. The best ways to help people recover and make money off of them. Despite Snake and Razor's attempts to flank her, Katherine exhibited remarkable poise and timing in her movements. She refrained from executing acrobatic kicks or reckless fists. Rather, she calculated every move so that she could drop her adversaries with minimal force while still getting the biggest effect. At a combat zone, she spoke to the motorcyclists who were onlookers. The value of efficiency surpasses that of physical power, you realize. Every action must be significant. Everything you do must have a reason. As Katherine's scientific precision methodically demolished his best fighters, Viper's rage grew. With their self-assurance eroded, the other motorcyclists retreated. "In what time will you act?" Viper gave them a yell. "Rescue her." But Joe stepped forward, shotgun in hand, before anyone could move. Members of the community who had gathered could be seen emerging from their automobiles through the windows as Vanessa brandished a baseball bat. "What sets us apart, Viper?" Katherine whispered. "A climate of terror governs you. Respect is my leadership stance. You have a way of enticing others to follow you. These folks." She signaled for the oncoming throng. "They've made the conscious decision to be here." Viper surveyed his surroundings, sensing his lead slipping away. Other chapters' motorcyclists were already retreating toward the exit, clearly disinterested in getting involved. "You're dead," he spat out. "Can you hear what I'm saying? Come tomorrow, you're gonna." "No way." He was interrupted by Katherine. "Your tyrannical rule will end this evening. Simply put, these folks." Outside, she indicated the expanding throng. "They've overcome their fear. You are helpless in the face of dread." Viper's expression was twisted with fury as he witnessed his meticulously crafted notion of dominance disintegrate. Faced with Katherine's unfaltering self-assurance and the community's united front, more and more motorcyclists were pulling back, their allegiance fading. "In your opinion, does this have any impact?" He retrieved a second blade from his boot and growled angrily. "I created this landmass out of thin air." His uncontrolled wrath made him clumsy as he charged toward Katherine, but no nurse would be able to take it from him. She was as smooth as glass, changing his direction with the flick of a wrist and delivering pinpoint pressure. Along with the first knife, the second lay on the floor. According to Katherine's collected response, "You accomplished nothing. You simply appropriated the products of others' violent and fearful actions. Viper, that is not construction. I call that parasitic." After catching his breath, Tank made an attempt to seize her from behind. Katherine dipped and contorted, her fingertips locating clusters of nerves in his thigh, causing him to plummet once again. Snake, who was still tending to his wounded hand, yelled out to his boss. "Something is wrong here. Other targets aren't like her." The Viper growled and demanded that you silence yourself. A chain dangling from his belt, he swung widely. "You don't mean anything, do you?" "Completely non-existent." Once the chain had fully extended, Katherine stepped inside its arc. Her hand sprang out and hit Viper square in the solar plexus with pinpoint accuracy. He knelt down and gasped for air. She spoke to the onlookers about battlefield medicine. "All of the body's systems are interdependent, as we discovered. Critical organs, pressure points, and clusters of nerves are all interconnected parts of a much larger system. To master that system, one must be aware of the precise amount of force that must be applied." She proved it by gently pressing a spot on Viper's neck, which caused him to collapse to his knees and let the chain slip from his paralyzed fingers. "You see, I might cause significant harm. I will continue," she said. "However, it is not my purpose for being here. At my core, I am a healer. Helping people, not hurting them, is my job." Additional members of the neighborhood had gathered through the windows. Standing united, the regular customers, late-shift truckers, and scrub-wearing hospital personnel showed Viper that his terror was ended. Under her breath, Katherine informed him that this was his final opportunity. "Quit arguing. You should get out of here. We will allow you to depart with your remaining dignity if you never return." Viper glanced around, noticing his allies fading. Other chapters' motorcyclists were already revving up their engines, clearly not interested in joining in on this shame. They had replaced their dread of him with something new, respect for someone stronger, and even his core members were pulling away. "This is a complete unknown to you." Although his voice was hardly audible, he managed to snarl. "No," Katherine told him angrily. "An era is coming to a close. Viper, your mission here is complete. No longer are these individuals frightened." At that very moment, Officer Thompson and a number of his deputies entered the building. "I find this quite intriguing. There have been allegations of criminal threats, attempted assault, and disturbing the peace. Have I said enough?" Viper's complexion turned white as he came to terms with how completely outwitted he had been. In addition to physically beating him, Katherine had also planned his downfall. "Nothing has ended yet." Even to his own ears, the words sounded empty when he tried it one last time. Mike confirmed the truth by removing the restraints. "At this point, we have witnesses. Many of them. Witnesses prepared to give their accounts of the Steel Shadow's actions. Your tyrannical rule comes to an end this evening." The rest of the bikers scattered as the cops started taking statements, leaving Viper and his inner circle to deal with the fallout. A new feeling of strength and unity had taken hold of the community members outside, and they started flooding inside the café. Joe shook his head in disbelief as he approached Katherine. "Nothing like that has ever been seen before. The control, the way you moved." Katherine explained that wound care is simply one aspect of combat medicine. It's all about having a thorough grasp of the human anatomy. No matter how strong or weak it is. With a tight embrace on her friend's arm, Isabella squeezed past the throng. Communication has already been made with the emergency rooms. Now that they know they may return without fear, people are flocking there. With her baseball bat firmly in her hands, Vanessa managed to muster up a tearful smile. "Tonight, you educated us all. The power of unity surpasses that of any danger." While being led away in handcuffs, Viper paused by Katherine's side. "Are you under the impression that this propels you to hero status?" His jaw dropped. "You're now the center of attention. Some people will be quite offended by what transpired here." Katherine looked calmly into his eyes. "They will subsequently gain the same insight that you did. To instill dread is not the point of strength, Viper. Facing it head-on is the key." Viper was led out of the restaurant to a resounding round of applause. This, however, wasn't the end, as Katherine was well aware. It would be necessary to confront the implications and ripples that would result from tonight's occurrences. But she felt that the united community surrounding her would be able to handle anything that came their way. For the reason that something strong had been proven tonight. That genuine change may occur when victims of bullying refuse to be silenced or intimidated. There were still unfinished business and the night was far from ended. But the Steel Shadow's rule came to an end, not because they were outnumbered, but because one brave woman dared to stand firm in a society that thrived when its members worked together. After Viper was taken into custody, Joe's Café became a makeshift gathering place for the neighborhood. Hospital staff assessed patients and took statements as police officers processed the scene. Katherine kept her composure and helped out where she could, her background as a war medic merging in perfectly with her natural nursing intuition. Many warrants for arrest. She was bandaging Tank's wrist when Mike told her. Someone requiring medical assistance was too important for her to disregard, no matter what. Wolverine will be absent for quite some time. For months, the district attorney has been assembling evidence, all they needed were witnesses ready to testify. While fastening the bandage, Katherine responded that sometimes people only need to see that standing up is feasible. Tank averted his gaze from hers, his colossal figure appearing diminutive in defeat. In a state of bewilderment and terror, Snake saw her labor as he awaited his own transportation to prison. "Tell me why you're assisting us." "In the end, though," Katherine stated plainly, "it's what I do." She went on to say that strength does not equal cruelty. Afraid to be left out, Isabella sprinted through the door. "You should view this. She displayed the video of the altercation that had gone viral on social media by raising her phone. It's pervasive. Many have come forward with personal accounts of their experiences with the steel shadows. It's quite dramatic. However, Katherine noted that Ghost was standing aside from the festivities. Something new had crept into his customary quiet. She cautiously made her way to him. "Do you have something to say?" Ghost looked around and murmured something. "Viper knows people. Different sections. Greater corporations. This retains their attention. Is it an alarm or a caution?" While analyzing his face, Katherine asked. "Be careful," Ghost said. "How was your night? This isn't limited to our chapter alone. A name is associated with the steel shadows. No one can just question that and walk away from them." Outside, chaos broke out just as Katherine was about to reply. Tears streaming down a young woman's face, she stormed inside the diner. "You must lend a hand, please. It's my sibling. Other motorcyclists. He's being hurt by them." Before anybody else could respond, Katherine had already taken action. In the parking lot's dappled light, 3 riders who had earlier escaped were delivering what they perceived as a severe lesson. Curled on the ground was their victim, a young man who was just out of his teens. "It's sufficient." The sound of Katherine's voice pierced the darkness. As they pivoted, the motorcyclists' expressions shifted between familiarity and animosity. "You have no business being involved in this, nurse. I'm merely trying to convey a message about loyalty." "Go 3 for 1. Katherine responded, "That's not a message," and she drew nearer. "It's heartless." Joined forces, they attacked her, hoping that in the face of Viper's failure, numbers would ultimately triumph. That was a mistake. Like she had in battle, Katherine shifted her body. Quick, accurate, and wastes no movement. All 3 of them were prostrated on the floor in an instant, their bodies betraying them in ways they couldn't fathom. She assisted the young man to his feet and then proceeded to explain pressure points and nerve clusters. "If you know where to hit, the human body is shockingly susceptible. Allow me to assist you with entering and being examined." While tending to the young man's wounds in the diner, Mike drew her aside. "Does the station have any news? Emergency meetings have already been called by other Steel Shadows chapters. Everything is getting a little out of hand here." "Good," Katherine responded, taking him by surprise. "They are welcome. The same lesson needs to be learned by every bully. People give in to fear when they let it." With his hands clenched, Joe walked over. "Perhaps you would benefit from a break. Stay hidden till everything calms down." Katherine, though, spoke with conviction. "They urge people to run and change their life because they are afraid. In a combat zone, I would never do it. I will not perform it at this location." Further patrons started trickling into the eatery, as if to drive home her argument. People were coming out of their houses and taking back their community places once word got out about the shadows being arrested. Besides, Katherine went on, seeing the restaurant come alive once more. "This has expanded beyond my own interests. Peruse your surroundings. Courage has been discovered by these individuals. This is something they will fight tooth and nail to keep." Isabella accompanied them, her phone continuing to ring with messages. A meeting of the hospital's governing board was organized. They intend to establish a network of resources to aid intimidation victims and introduce new security measures. "Katherine, you have begun something." "Certainly, every one of us did." Katherine gave her the go-ahead. All of those who rose to their feet this evening and would not turn a blind eye are integral to this. But the warnings of the spirits remained with Katherine as she observed the festivities. Even though the Steel Shadows only lived in a small town, the events of tonight would affect more than just them. A text message from an unknown number made her phone vibrate. "You've encountered some formidable adversaries. I hope you're prepared for the next step. Katherine chose not to reply and instead erased the message. Dangerous foes and harsher odds had befallen her in Afghanistan. With the same unwavering will that had propelled her through 3 tours of duty, she was prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. Although this was a major win, it was only the beginning, and the night had a long way to go. It had been worthwhile, Katherine thought, as she saw the diner's spirits lift and their conversations become more open. Because even the most seemingly insignificant acts of bravery can pave the way for monumental transformations, like when a nurse refuses to give up in a late-night diner. Over Mercy General Hospital, dawn was dawning as Katherine concluded her first shift following the altercation at Joe's. As word of the tragedy quickly spread, her usual nursing rounds took on a whole new dynamic. The patients observed her with a mixture of wonder and intrigue, while a few of her co-workers were awkward in her presence. While they were on break, Isabella mentioned that 3 additional Steel Shadows chapters had contacted the authorities. They're upset. One man whose name was Reaper. Evidently, he holds a more senior position inside their group. Katherine maintained an expressionless face as she persisted in analyzing patient records. They're attempting to instill dread by manipulating perceptions. This is a typical strategy. Katherine, Isabella insisted, this isn't Afghanistan. These individuals have connections all over the place. Warfare, narcotics, and protection ring businesses. With a serious expression on his face, Dr. Wilson hastened into the break room before Katherine could answer. There is impending trauma. There are multiple victims, and they are all clearly victims of gang brutality. As life-saving ambulances rolled into the emergency room, calm mayhem ensued. A total of 4 patrons of Joe's Diner were brutally assaulted. Everyone understood. The vengeance of the Steel Shadows had started. Outside my residence, they were waiting. Katherine treated one sufferer while he gasped for air. It was said that this is the result of standing up to the wrong crowd. Mike Thompson was attending to his personal crisis at the police station across town. A pattern of intimidation was evident as reports of vandalism, threats, and intimidated individuals poured in from all around the town. When Katherine contacted to inquire, he assured her that everything is well coordinated. These aren't haphazard deeds. Someone is plotting this, attempting to reverse yesterday night's events. They aim to demonstrate that a single triumph does not alter the course of events. Katherine spoke calmly in response. That dread persists. A meeting was convened in an emergency by the hospital board. While they expressed their worries, Katherine remained clad in her scrubs. You started out well, and we get that, the chairman said. However, things have gotten dicey. The threat level is rising. Patients feel unsafe entering the facility. Due respect being accorded, Katherine interjected. Already, patients were terrified. Fear had already spread throughout this town as a result of the Steel Shadows. People are now freely discussing it, which is the sole change. Regardless, a different board member chimed in. Taking a leave of absence until things calm down might be the best course of action. Katherine's reply was composed yet forceful. They will win the instant we start running away from their threats and altering our lives. Definitely not me. Her phone beeped with a message from an encrypted number as she departed from the meeting. Grim Reaper is eager to meet. Level surface. Have a conversation. Mike objected the moment she showed him the note. This is a trap. This group is unwilling to communicate. Their goal is to humiliate you. Katherine seemed to agree. However, if they are truly committed to conveying their message, they will not rest content with mere intimidation. The only way to stop additional people from getting wounded might be to meet them directly. There was an air of tension and resolve back at Joe's Diner. Customers continued to flock in spite of the warnings. Each of them triumphed in a defiance act against intimidation, though perhaps fewer than previously. Last night, they assaulted 3 additional eateries. Katherine sat down as usual, and Joe reported. Sights that spoke to us. Smashed panes. The employees were in danger. Serving coffee with a grin, Vanessa wore a black eye from an attack by strangers. But we have not departed. I mean, isn't that what's important? Katherine examined Vanessa's facial bruise. Her background in medicine and her time in the military had fused into icy precision. Aiming to demonstrate that their might had not been diminished, the steel shadows were ramping up their actions. Once again, her phone beeped. Tonight is the meeting. At midnight. Relic of a Mason Street factory. Make your own way here or we'll start hammering hospitals. I will be present this time, Katherine responded. Isabella, who was reading behind her, took hold of her arm. No way are you being serious. They desire this very thing. No, Katherine told her companion. Their goal is to instill fear in everyone once more. To prove that standing up just leads to additional agony. As she paused, memories of comparable circumstances in Afghanistan flooded back. Not to fight, but to demonstrate that you will not be intimidated, force must occasionally be responded with force. The town was on edge as darkness descended. An impending event was anticipated by all. The real concern was not whether the steel shadows would retaliate, but rather, with what force. Katherine meticulously prepared, utilizing her extensive understanding of medicine and military experience. Were Reaper to wish to converse, she would do so. She hadn't made it through 3 tours by being unprepared, so she knew he wanted something different. There was the abandoned plant up ahead. What was to follow took place in an ideal setting, its deserted shell. From the shadows, Katherine could feel eyes watching her as she drew near. She was no longer the sole focus of this. It was meant to demonstrate to everyone that bravery isn't limited to a single triumph. The actual struggle has only just started. Katherine pounded on the metal doors of the dilapidated factory, and they groaned. Strange shadows were formed across rusting machinery as moonlight streamed through broken windows. She walked carefully, her footfall resonating in the huge expanse. Senses on high alert. From the shadows, a low-pitched voice beckoned to me, I must confess. It takes a lot of guts or complete stupidity to come here by yourself. From the darkness, the grim Reaper beckoned. Tall and slender, with facial scars from a bygone era and hair that is streaked with gray. The theatrical swagger of Viper was in stark contrast to the quiet assurance with which Reaper held himself, befitting someone accustomed to actual power. You must be quite bold or desperate to meet me in such a vulnerable state. As she spoke, Katherine counted 6 more shadowy creatures and gave her response. It was unexpectedly heartfelt when Reaper laughed after what had happened to Viper. Viper, though useful, lost his place. However, you are unique in every way. Returned from the battlefield as a nurse, she single-handedly brought down a whole chapter of steel shadows. Very remarkable. Put your hopes in something else if you're attempting to entice me. To hire you. Reaper drew nearer, his expression icy as he studied her. My goal is to comprehend you, not the other way around. Look, what transpired at that eatery. It's making things worse. Nervousness is spreading to other chapters. Things that shouldn't be questioned are being questioned by some. To the left of Katherine, a shadowy figure shifted. In Snake, she saw a man who had been released on bond not long ago. The wound from their previous confrontation was still on his hand. You have initiated a process, Reaper went on to say. An avalanche. Individuals in 3 further towns have reportedly opposed our chapters. People who were present at previous occurrences are now coming forward. That's terrible for company. The problem seems to be with you, Katherine responded quietly. Perhaps we need to rethink our company strategy. One that does not depend on frightening defenseless individuals. His eyes were unaffected by the Reaper's smile. Offer me this. You should get out of here. This coming evening. We will even supply a monetary reward for your efforts. Begin over in a different location. And if I say no, then what transpired earlier? The slaps. The damage. That was merely an introduction. All the things and people you hold dear will be destroyed by us. Healthcare facility. At the table. Allies of yours. Nobody is going to be okay. Katherine showed no fear. So, what did I pick up in Afghanistan? Harmful things can only be said when no one is around. By myself. On the other hand, when people band together, bullies like you become powerless. Think you've started a revolution? Death's voice grew more severe. Just one nurse is rallying the troops to confront the evil motorcyclists. My darling, this is not a film. Behold, the truth. I see your point. Katherine nodded in agreement. Behold, the truth. Also, your scare tactics aren't going to get you anywhere anymore. No responsibility here. Forget about this town. Observing the tension in Reaper's men, she moved closer to him. Curious about what else I picked up while fighting. Identifying a bluffing player. You are not in this to strike a bargain. It seems like fear has brought you here. The front of the Reaper cracked slightly. Feeling irate? Regarding what? I am afraid I will lose control. Those who rise to their feet. Every eyewitness who comes forward. Their example is proving that it can be done. And when the fear subsides, your entire dominion will fall. A quick change. One of the men from Reaper charging forward. Katherine, though, was prepared. With a deft maneuver, she managed to bring him to his knees by applying pressure to specific areas. We can't do that. People around him let out a gasp. Totally missed it. Medicine for battle. Reaper was briefed by Katherine. All of the human body's flaws are uncovered. All potential weak spots. In order to avoid injury. In order to recover. However, understanding is reciprocal. A shadow fell across Reaper's face. Surely you can't imagine that any of us would fall for your pranks. No. Sophia, she said. I believe this will work. She retrieved her phone and displayed the live signal that was being transmitted. There has been a constant flow of information to the state's news outlets, the FBI's gang task force, and the police ever since I stepped foot inside. The dangers you pose. You have acknowledged the assaults. Oh, absolutely. When the cops stepped out of the shadows, everything changed. All hands on deck. The sound of Mike Thompson's voice echoed. A hush falls across the entire room. Hands in a visible area. The icy self-assurance of Reaper crumbled to pieces. You made it happen. No. Katherine gave him the go-ahead. That was your own work. Because they believed that instilling a sense of terror would be sufficient to maintain order. Through failing to anticipate the actions that individuals will take once they have experienced an excess of fear. Katherine advanced toward Reaper as the police closed in. Here is my alternative proposal. Deal with the inevitable. Own up to your mistakes. Prove to your people that intimidating them isn't the way to be strong. The key is to accept responsibility for your actions. When the cops took over, the plant descended into a controlled anarchy. However, Katherine maintained eye contact with Reaper. Two soldiers, unprepared for the conclusion of a conflict, finally see each other. This is just the beginning. As his hands were cuffed, he sounded an alarm. I see your point. Katherine nodded in agreement. Not at all. Reason being, the truth has been revealed. The power of unity surpasses that of any danger. And you have no choice except to accept that. An earthquake shook the criminal underground as Reaper and his associates were apprehended. First thing in the morning, television helicopters circled over the abandoned plant as FBI agents escorted a group of Steel Shadows members to waiting cars. The state's largest gang bust ever was what the local media were describing it as. You dared to do something really risky. The two of them watched the incident play out as Mike informed Katherine. Sometimes the biggest risk is doing nothing, as if the wire hadn't worked or if backup hadn't been in position. She responded, recalling comparable instances during battle. Choosing to let fear prevail. Running up the stairs in her night shift scrubs, Isabella sprinted. There is a flurry of activity surrounding the hospital. You won't believe what else happened, according to Dr. Wilson, and individuals are already returning to the emergency room to say they feel safe again. Her phone exploded with similar stories from other towns as she pulled it out and showed Katherine the social media posts. By speaking out against local gangs and providing evidence, people were able to end the cycle of fear that had gripped their communities. A domino effect of sorts. Continued Isabella. Take a seat in the restaurant. It inspired optimism. There was a palpable energy back at Joe's. The restaurant was crowded. People are rejoicing over more than only the arrests. Coming together again as a community. As she gracefully transitioned between tables, Vanessa's black eye transformed from a symbol of victimhood into an emblem of bravery. Check out what someone posted. A hand-painted banner hung over the front window, and Joe pointed to it and shouted out. The house where the town's most courageous nurse resides. Feeling humiliated by all the attention, Katherine shook her head. Joe, please remove that. Nobody is being singled out here. An old woman's voice, though, intervened. The woman from the initial confrontation, Mrs. Jenkins, rose from her seat. We are all involved. But sometimes all it takes is a guiding light to illuminate the possibilities. Everyone turned their heads when there was a racket at the entrance. Ghost stepped in, dressed casually rather than in his trademark leather vest. As he drew near Katherine, the diners went silent. They're all talking, he declared without elaboration. Everything from a reptile to a snake. Through the years, criminal networks have been set up. Everything is being revealed. Would you mind explaining this to me? While analyzing his face, Katherine asked. Reason being, you were accurate. Ghost responded. Regarding anxiety. In regards to power. A few of us. To feel like we belonged, we signed up. As a token of appreciation. We lost sight of the distinction between reverence and dread at some point. Dr. Wilson had left a message for Katherine before she could answer. In a hospital emergency room. Urgently need your presence at this very moment. She discovered a spontaneous gathering rather than an emergency at Mercy General. Supporters in the crowd include hospital employees, patients, and members of the community. A cheerful Dr. Wilson stood in the middle. He made an announcement about the board's recent unanimous vote. We're starting a brand new initiative to connect out to the community. They want you, Katherine, to oversee programs that teach medical personnel self-defense, provide resources for victims of intimidation, and work in tandem with law enforcement. She was about to speak out when Isabella interrupted her. Consider the repercussions of saying no before you do so. You can provide a hand to other towns so they can replicate our success. Prove to them that standing together is possible. A continual flow of disclosures persisted throughout the day. Members of Steel Shadows have turned themselves in, leading to the dissolution of more chapters. Newly empowered communities are putting up extraordinary opposition against other gangs in other areas. Taking the protection money out of their books is a local business. Seeing the dominoes fall is a bit like that. The late afternoon update included Mike's comment. People are always encouraged when one individual takes a stand. A deluge of individuals are coming forward to the DA's office, revealing evidence that they had concealed for years. Finally, as night fell, Katherine settled into her customary spot at Joe's counter. The revelry had subsided, but the air was still thick with potential. Vanessa reassured her listener that she was being called a hero. Bringing a mug of tea across to the table. Responding, "No, I am not a hero," Katherine stated. "All I am is a guy who crammed all that battle knowledge into his memory." That togetherness, not force, is the most effective weapon in the fight against fear. At the end of the day, her phone buzzed once more. The sender's number is unknown. Your alternative solution is greatly appreciated. A former Viper. Katherine had a startling realization as she looked around the diner at the faces of people who had overcome their fear. Defeating the Steel Shadows wasn't the only objective of the fight. It all started with encouraging people to believe in themselves and their bravery. Plus, that triumph would remain significant even after the news stopped covering it. The biggest conference room at Mercy General was at capacity 2 weeks following Reaper's arrest. Members of the medical community, police officers, and community leaders from 3 different states met for the initial meeting of what the media was referring to as the Storm Protocol, after the nurse who initiated it. Even though she was still uneasy with all the attention, Katherine knew this was a pivotal moment, so she stood at the podium. She started by saying that what happened at Joe's Café wasn't about a single individual standing up to bullies. It was about a group of people realizing they were stronger together. In her curriculum, she integrated her knowledge of combat medicine with tactics for effective self-defense and community organizing. Even more crucially, it demonstrated the power of unity in the face of intimidation. No one survives alone, that was the first lesson I learned in combat, she went on to say. Here, too, the same rule holds. Being brave as an individual is admirable, but nothing can defeat the power of a united society. Isabella took great satisfaction in her position in the audience. Next to her sat a specter, now identified as David Chen, who had emerged as an unanticipated ally. His first-hand understanding of gang operations was crucial in assisting other communities in recognizing and combating forms of intimidation. Isolation was the key for the Steel Shadows. As soon as he got the chance to speak, Ghost elaborated. People would be our targets, and we would use them as examples. What transpired at the diner, nevertheless, revealed an unexpected detail. That plan collapses as soon as the people band together. You could see the town's transformation all throughout. Joe's Diner had become a symbol. Fans would go from far and wide to enjoy a meal at the original counter. The most courageous nurse banner has been SW. Apped out with a more straightforward message by Joe. Unity in the community. Separate from Katherine, Mike Thompson retrieved her after the session. The FBI has accomplished a great deal. 6 states were probed when Reaper testified. Protection rackets, narcotics enterprises, weapons trafficking. The whole thing is crumbling. The dangers, though? Katherine inquired since she was aware that other criminal organizations had tried to exact revenge. Mike said that he was becoming weaker daily. It turns out that the entire system of intimidation just falls apart when people stop being scared. Later that night, on her way to the diner as usual, Katherine encountered Vanessa teaching a class of new waitresses their jobs. As she showed the girls some basic techniques for self-defense, they studied her every move. Even though she had a black eye, Vanessa went back to work and claimed that everyone thought she was insane. However, you demonstrated that we need not be alone when we stand firm. Even the eatery had transformed. One wall was covered with photos. Various news articles detailing such actions in other towns were intercut with photographs of community members who had joined forces that evening. The Courage Wall, Joe dubbed it. Please find attached another letter. Slid an envelope across the counter, Joe said. This one comes from a Seattle nurse. The experience you shared reportedly prompted their hospital to launch a similar initiative. Upon opening the letter, Katherine read accounts of other towns that had overcome adversity. All throughout, it was taking place. They learned the hard way that fear was effective only when they allowed it. Isabella had sent her a text, and her phone buzzed. These days, ER is totally different. Think back to the days when nobody dared to come in after dark. They are now aware that we will support them. Everyone on the hospital board was on board with the new procedures. More importantly, Dr. Wilson had established support mechanisms for both employees and patients in addition to implementing new security standards. Everyone understood. Not only were guards present, but the community as a whole worked together to keep everyone safe. Night fell, and Katherine sat down at her window, as she often did, to observe the town she had helped change. People were out and about in the streets well past their usual bedtime. Companies kept their hours longer. There was no longer the palpable sense of dread that had pervaded the situation. Is a penny worth considering? As Ghost sank onto the chair across from her, he asked. He had become a fixture at these nightly debriefings, where he would provide advice on how other gangs may attempt to seize control. According to Katherine, it was in Afghanistan that we realized that a cohesive unit is more important than a well-stocked one when it comes to fighting a war. While speaking carefully, Ghost mentioned that some of the younger men who have left the life are discussing the possibility of beginning a new chapter. Instead of instigating violence, a writers' organization prioritized community work and safeguarding individuals. Katherine grinned. Assembling a guardian angel team from Steel Shadows? A dramatic change, indeed. That is, after all, the point of it all. With emotion, Ghost showed the bustling restaurant-goers that there is an alternate route. To back up his claim, a gang of ex-Steel Shadows showed up, but instead of leather vests, they were sporting t-shirts bearing the emblem of their new club. A headgear featuring a motorbike wheel. After giving Katherine a polite nod, they sat down at the counter. There was more than meets the eye to the change. After years of terrorizing a town, these men were finally becoming a part of it. True transformation occurred, though not without its challenges. Katherine sat in Dr. Wilson's office, analyzing the impact of their new initiatives, 1 month after the events that reshaped the community. The data revealed an astonishing tale. Although there was a notable decrease in injuries connected to violence, there was an increase in emergency care visits. People no longer shied away from asking for assistance. With a packet slid across his desk, Dr. Wilson announced that the FBI was interested in rolling out your program around the country. A community resilience protocol is what they're dubbing it. Your advice is sought after. She nevertheless accepted the folder, despite Katherine's response that she is a nurse and not a policymaker. Wilson shot back that you were both. The movement you've established here is revolutionizing people's perspectives on public safety. Law enforcement is no longer the sole focus. Everybody needs to do their share. Beaming from the doorway, they were abruptly taken aback. Isabella walked in first, and then Katherine recognized the adolescent girl. The daughter of Viper, Lucy Carson. Isabella expressed gently that she was adamant about seeing you. Mary didn't resemble her dad at all. She exuded an air of uncertain vulnerability, in contrast to Viper's menacing aura. Not only did you treat me well in the emergency room last month, but you also stopped him. For that, she said Katherine, she wanted to thank you. Lucy was motioned by Katherine to take a seat. Are you doing okay? Much better. A little smile escaped Lucy's lips. With Dad's protection money no longer depleting our finances, Mom has taken a job at the grocery store. We're actually managing rather well. Additionally, individuals no longer stare at us with dread. A different type of gathering took place later that night at Joe's Diner. Meeting with community leaders, the newly established Guardian Angels, former Steel Shadows members who had opted for a different path, discussed their function in maintaining peace. These streets are already familiar to us. The gang was informed by Ghost. Gang mentality and behavior are well understood by us. We can now stop others from stepping in to fill the gap thanks to this newfound knowledge. Noticing the former bikers' interactions with the same population they had intimidated, Katherine observed from her normal place. It had its flaws. It took time to earn trust. A step forward, though. As she sat down, Mike Thompson came over, coffee nearby. I received the final tally from the task group of the FBI. All around the nation, 37 Steel Shadows chapters disbanded. Evidence from over 200 members is being turned over to the state. Just because Reaper testified has resulted in 53 arrests. What about the attempts at retaliation? Day by day, I am weakening. A grin spread across Mike's face. Evidently, other gangs are also facing difficulties in recruiting. Participating on a losing team is something no one wants to do. Vanessa, who had completely healed from her wounds, made her way to their table. She had established herself as a leader in her own right, arranging for service workers all around town to participate in self-defense lessons. She boasted about the new girls and said you should see them. They are studying more than simply self-defense. Their ability to support one another is growing. Just by requesting assistance, one of them foiled an attempted robbery last night. Suddenly, every single person in the establishment sprang to their feet. A message from the hospital rang Katherine's phone. A different group of people required assistance in establishing their own program. At this point, the requests were arriving every day. Cities and towns around the nation were interested in finding out what had happened here so they might do it themselves. She pondered how odd it was that a few pressure point maneuvers performed at a diner could have led to such a scenario. Ghost joined them at the table and stated that it wasn't the movements. People were shown that they may choose between two extremes, fear and unity, isolation and community. When they realized it could be done. A cluster of adolescents walked inside the eatery, and he drew back. Being among them and joking with friends was something Lucy could never have imagined when she was the daughter of the feared gang leader. Isabella noticed that there had been a significant shift. The mending of the community is just as important as stopping the evil guys. Remember how you used to say that at the emergency room? As important as it is to treat the injury, the goal of treatment should be the patient's overall recovery. As Katherine observed the bustling restaurant, she noticed that individuals from diverse backgrounds were now freely interacting with one another. Mixing with the business owners they had extorted in the past, the ex-shadows mixed. Community initiatives were planned by repentant gang members while off-duty police officers sat with them. While restocking their glasses, Joe informed them of the finest part. It's no longer limited to opposing gangs. In countless ways, people are watching out for one another. I observed Mrs. Jenkins providing arithmetic tutoring to Lucy. The hospital was able to open a free clinic in the former industrial neighborhood last week with the assistance of those guardian angels. It wasn't only about safety, the change was revolutionary. It was all about getting back together and mending the community that had been ripped apart by terror. As dusk descended, Katherine went outdoors for some introspective peace. A flurry of activity characterized the street. Lovebirds strolling side by side. Bicycling children. Elders savoring the cool night breeze. Everyone was calm and collected now. Once again, her phone beeped. Yet another municipality has reached out for advice. Yet another group of people prepared to take a stand. It was 3 months after the fateful night that Joe's Diner held a unique party. The Courage Wall had expanded to incorporate photographs and anecdotes from all throughout the nation. Mobilized communities take a stand, unite, and end the fear cycle. Seated in her customary location, Katherine observed the eclectic group that had swarmed the eatery. As Vanessa served clients, Lucy Carson, who took great delight in her waitress outfit, gladly assisted. Under Ghost's guidance, the guardian angels had established themselves as a permanent part of the town. They no longer used their bikes as a weapon, but as a sign of solidarity. Do you recall when this entire thing began? Asking as she climbed onto the stool next to her companion, Isabella was just one nurse standing firm. According to Katherine, it was never about just one individual, but the memory brought a smile to her face. It was all about demonstrating the power of possibility when fear is overcome. Even the hospital had changed. Many other hospitals and clinics had taken notice of Dr. Wilson's community service initiatives and were planning to implement them. Once a terrifying after-hours hangout, the emergency department has become a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. The news that Mike Thompson brought with him completed the circle. I just received confirmation from the FBI that the testimony of Viper and Reaper was essential in the downfall of 3 significant criminal groups. The chain reaction that you set in motion is far from over. On the cusp of additional arrivals, the door chimed. There will be a major announcement this evening, and everyone from hospital employees to former patients to community leaders will be there. Joe got atop a chair and started yelling for someone's attention. With an emotionally heavy voice, he started 3 months ago. It became out that this diner was more than just a restaurant. What occurs when people unite became a symbol of that. We are formally announcing it tonight. A fresh sign, hung over the counter, was revealed by him. A community diner where compassion and bravery coexist, Joe's. As the audience erupted in cheers, Katherine beheld a hidden expression on their faces. Confidence, a sense of belonging, and pride in a society where fear was no longer an issue. Ghost, who is currently bridging the gap between the community and law enforcement, offered his unique viewpoint. The true miracle, you know. We managed to thwart the steel shadows, but that's not all. That there is always an alternative is what we proved to people. No longer the shy girl she had been, Lucy made her way to Katherine's seat. From his prison cell, Dad wrote to me. Cleverly, she whispered, he's trying to make amends, take responsibility, and act differently now. According to him, witnessing your ability to heal people, in spite of everything, made him understand the meaning of true strength. As night struck, the festivities carried on, but it wasn't all about reminiscing about previous triumphs. Plans for new projects, community gardens, youth mentoring programs, and support groups for families impacted by gang violence were shared by those present. It seemed as if the metamorphosis had gone its own way. That evening, Katherine's phone rang one final time. It was a message from an unidentified number. You learned to rescue people while under enemy fire in Afghanistan. We learned how to save our town from you. You have shown us that standing together is more effective than any fear we might have had separately. Katherine had a significant realization as she observed many events unfolding around the café. Lucy discovered her destiny, Ghost guided his guardian angels toward redemption, Joe smiled proudly, Isabella was a constant companion, Mike served with dedication, and Vanessa regained her confidence. Much more had transpired from the tale that had started with a single nurse confronting motorcyclists. It was about more than just standing up to bullies, it was about mending broken hearts and minds as well as physical bodies. In battle medicine, they say. No one in particular, she said. Our primary objective is to ensure the patient's full recovery, not merely to halt the bleeding. People were talking and laughing in the diner. Individuals boldly asserting their place in the community filled the street. Bikes belonging to the guardian angels shone brightly in the streetlights. Instead of intimidation, their chrome now reflects hope. The real triumph was not merely the lack of fear, but rather the manifestation of something more powerful, a community coming together, healing, and progressing ahead as one. Katherine beamed as she took a drink of her tea at her normal perch by the window. Standing firm can sometimes be the first step toward a greater transformation, and the power of unity, compassion, and bravery can often triumph against overwhelming odds.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.